Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It's a great privilege to welcome you here to Leeds Minster. If you've not been here before you leave, do make sure you have a look through the doors and go into the rest of our worship space. The big machine is now gone. They said that it would be gone by 2 o'clock, so 2 minutes to 2, and they just got out the door, which is great. We just replaced some lighting. So if you've known Leeds Minster in the past, it is a shade brighter than it has been previously. It's a great joy for us to partner in this event, but Sue Clark is the person who's made it all happen. We've simply provided the space. So welcome, and I hand over to Sue.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for providing such a fantastic venue for our first, the first talk on this roadshow that we're doing down the country. And it's quite fitting to be here in Leeds for this first talk of the tour. It's not the first of Sarah's talks in this visit, because we've just spent a whole weekend at Minster Acres where Sarah was talking. But these talks of the tour, this is the first venue. And it was at a venue here in Leeds that Michael and I first heard about Sarah Bachelard. And that was before COVID, just before COVID, when Father Lawrence Freeman came from the WCCM to give a talk on the future of the church, and recommended that we listen to some of Sarah's talks online, which we did. And we were so taken by what she was saying, which really sort of spoke into my heart, that we looked her up on Google, as you do, and found that Sarah was the leader of a contemplative church in Canberra in Australia. And as we were going into COVID lockdown, fortuitous for us, the services went on Zoom. And so we were able then to join some of those services at Benedictus Church in Canberra. And we have gone most Saturday mornings ever since. It's been a real gift to us to be able to go to those services. And so it's delightful for us to be with Sarah this week as we go up and down the country. Sarah is a theologian, an Anglican priest. She's an author. She is interested in philosophy as well as theology. And she has written books, some of which we have available today, if you would like to take something more of Sarah home with you. And Sarah just talks very much about transformation, how contemplation can really transform not just us individually, but as communities together. And what she says just opens to me things that I feel I know, but don't quite know until I hear the words express it. And so that's the gift that Sarah brings to me. So I think a very warm welcome to Sarah for this first talk, Soul in the System.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for coming on this rather chilly afternoon. But it's lovely to be here, and I've been had a wonderful weekend at Minster Acres, and just wonderful to begin this journey of sharing with you all. So thank you for being here. This notion of soul in the system has been bubbling around in my heart and mind for several years. But this is the first opportunity I've had to reflect on it in a sustained way. And you're the first audience for this reflection. So I'm very interested in how it strikes you. I'm going to approach the theme from the perspective of lived experience. And as I said, I hope later to hear how my sense of things resonates with yours. I work, as Sue said, in pastoral ministry in Canberra, which is the Australian national capital. Those who participate in the community that I lead are involved, as I'm sure are most of you, in a whole range of systems: families, workplaces, community organisations, churches, professions. All of us interact with government, judicial, financial, and communication systems, and we're affected by health, aged care, school, and emergency management systems, among others. And any of these may be more or less functional, and so, of course, it has always been. But increasingly, it seems, many find their engagement with these systems profoundly stressful and difficult. Many of those who are working are overworked, under-resourced, and tending to burnout. Those who are not working or in need of health or welfare services are often underserved, even though our societies are supposedly wealthier than they've ever been. Families themselves are under increasing strain as parents work long hours, the cost of childcare rises, and social supports for the elderly and the young erode. At the same time, the system as a whole seems less and less capable of enabling common goods like public education, a healthy media and ecosystem, public libraries, and community spaces. Many have argued that our contemporary economic paradigm lies at the root of these systemic stresses. At the beginning of this century, German theologian Dorothee Söller described our situation as clearly and as critically, I think, as anyone. She wrote, "Since 1989, we live in a standardised, globalised economic order of technocracy that demands and achieves total disposition over space, time, and the natural world. Its engine runs on, driven by the coercion to produce more and confirmed by technological success of unimaginable proportions. And this engine is programmed for ever more speed, productivity, consumption, and profit for about 20% of humankind. In all of history," she writes, "this program is more efficient and more brutal than comparable engines and their towers of Babel. Within this super engine, human beings are not only alienated from what they might become, as Karl Marx observed, but they are also addicted and dependent as never before." Well, it's a bleak view, and I know it can be disputed, at least in part. For several decades now, there have been reductions in absolute poverty, improvements in literacy and life expectancy, and significant technological and medical progress in many places. Philosopher and political theorist Jonathan Rowson notes that progress on some metrics coexists with collapse on others, and this obscures our sense of what's happening and confounds consensus on how radically we should seek to change our ways. Nevertheless, it's undeniable that the way we are living is ecologically suicidal, and that millions of ordinary people find themselves increasingly forced to live inhumanly. It's been that way in parts of the world for decades, but the impacts that perhaps could formerly be hidden at the periphery of consciousness in our society are now increasingly visible in our midst. There are those working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Housing stress affects a vast number of people, even in professional and formerly well-paying jobs. While the cost of work for many is the erosion, if not the obliteration, of rhythms of work and rest. In all this, even those who are in the fortunate position of being able to pursue work that feels vocational and fulfilling find the price hard to pay. A friend who works as an academic wondered, how do I maintain my soul in a dysfunctional and demanding workplace that I'm not wanting or able to leave anytime soon? How can I keep my job and retain my sanity? How can I continue to live in some sense healthily and happily? Well, this is the point at which meditation and the widespread rediscovery of mindfulness and contemplative practice has seemed to have something to offer. In the last 15 to 20 years, and it's been fueled by research in neuroscience, psychology and biology, what's been called the contemporary boom in mindfulness has spread over a huge range of fields: education, healthcare, business, the military, and law enforcement, to name a few. The promise of contemplation resonates powerfully, it seems, as an antidote to the ills of our compulsively busy and anxious age. Mindfulness and meditation apps abound. Here's a post from the popular mindfulness app, Headspace, discussing the benefits of meditation in the context of contemporary work. It says, the workplace can often be a source of intense stress, anxiety, and burnout. However, it can also be an ideal place for mindfulness and meditation. Meditating at work can reduce stress and frustration while also boosting focus, compassion, energy, and productivity. At a time when so many of us spend a large portion of our lives at our jobs, the office may actually be the easiest and most consistent place to schedule meditation into our calendars. It's not just individuals picking up meditation as part of their wellness toolkit. Organisations and employers are increasingly seeing this practice as a way of sustaining productivity and increasing what's called resilience in the face of the demands of the life we have collectively brought forth. The Headspace post goes on to list the thousands of people currently meditating at work using the Headspace app, including employees of companies like Google, LinkedIn, Adobe, General Electric, Unilever, and the biotech company Genentech. These companies realise the value of taking their employees' health seriously and have made a commitment to embracing mindfulness tools to reduce stress and increase physical and mental well-being, says the app. Well, now clearly Headspace has a vested commercial interest in all this. Think your company might benefit from integrating mindfulness training for employees? Share this article and the Headspace for Work site with your company's HR team. But even contemplative churches and communities can be drawn into advocating for the value of meditation in these terms, thus giving us a sense of having something to offer that is genuinely useful for ameliorating suffering in our world. At one level, I think there is value in all this. I came to mindfulness meditation myself because of overwhelming anxiety in a life crisis, and it helped me profoundly. I learned to be less attached to neurotic patterns of thought and to live more simply day to day rather than driven by fear of the future. But what I find concerning is the extent to which much of the discourse around meditation in our culture simply takes for granted, takes as given, the conditions that give rise to so many of the problems it will purportedly ameliorate. Any life has its crises. But is this supposed to be the permanent state of a whole culture? Are our children supposed to be suffering unprecedented levels of anxiety? And must chronic stress be our routine experience of life at work and at home? According to Headspace, quote, "It's no surprise so many companies are turning to meditation given the staggering financial impact that stress, presenteeism, and poor mental health can have on business." It goes on, the American Institute of Stress reports that companies experience as much as $300 billion in lost productivity annually, almost $200 billion in stress-related illness expenses, and 1 million workers being absent every day. This is still quoting, "By implementing mindfulness programs, companies across diverse industries are reaping the benefits of improved employee well-being. For example, 1 year after a certain healthcare company implemented a mindfulness program, healthcare costs fell 7%, saving the company over $6 million. And their study also found that mindfulness increased job effectiveness, with employees gaining an average of 62 minutes of productivity per week, ultimately saving the company $3,000 per employee per year." But what Headspace never asks is, what is going on that American companies experience $200 billion in stress-related illness expenses and $300 billion in lost productivity annually? Even more bizarrely, what is going on that the only measure of success that Headspace offers for its product is in the value terms that presumably drive the epidemic of stress-related illness in the first place? Employees gaining 62 minutes of productivity per week, as if that is what our lives are for. It isn't just the corporate world. In her recent book, Dear Elia, Asian American academic Mimi Cook notes that universities adopt the language of wellness, but defined by hyper-productivity and achievement. Take care of yourself, but only so that you can be the best worker possible. This, she says, is a wellness that is compulsory, that puts pressure on you to pretend you are okay and frames not being okay as some kind of personal failure. And the question I'm wanting to explore is, at what point does the promotion of meditation as a means for enabling people to cope with these stresses become collusion with systemic injustice? As Dorothy Seller, theologian, puts it, no more than an aspect of the market against which it promises to offer protection. If we're being forced to live inhumanly, should we be learning to adapt ourselves to such demands? To allow the ill that is caused to be privatised, such that any distress is interpreted as lack of resilience rather than as structural sin? Or is there a need to clear the money changers from the temple? To realise that true contemplation cannot be about propping up a corrupting system, but must enable us to relate more truthfully to it. In other words, do we need to discover what Seller calls mysticism as resistance? So this section is called True Contemplation. This is from the Gospel of Mark. Then they came to Jerusalem, and Jesus entered the temple and began to drive out those who were selling and those who were buying in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. He was teaching and saying, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations'? But you have made it a den of robbers." What's striking about this scene, as Mark depicts it, is that Jesus drives out not just the sellers, overturning the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. He drives out those who were buying in the temple too. This is a system in which everyone is implicated. All who are there have forgotten what worship actually is. The Psalms and prophets had continually taught that the sacrifice acceptable to God is a broken spirit and a contrite heart. The word of the Lord had come to Jeremiah at the entrance to the temple, saying, "If you truly act justly one with another, if you do not oppress the alien, the orphan, and the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not go after other gods to your own hurt, then I will dwell with you in this place." When Jesus breaks up the trade in temple coinage and sacrificial animals, he's simply pointing out that according to the wisdom of its own tradition, this system is misidentifying the sacrifice called for, and it's commodifying what cannot be bought. The temple has become distracted from the conditions of true worship, justice and mercy, thereby making of God an idol and rendering people's best intentions false. And I'm wondering if something similar is happening in the enthusiastic uptake of contemplative practice by contemporary culture. I'm wondering if it risks distracting and alienating us from the very good we seek, making us enablers of the injustice of the system. For true contemplation is not essentially about stress release and relaxation, in order that we may go on perpetuating a system that, to say the least, seems built to generate dis-ease. No. True contemplation is, as Rowan Williams puts it, self-forgetting gazing towards the light of God. It is sheer presence of finite subject to, with, in infinite act. It's not something we do to further an agenda of productivity and consumption that is ultimately hostile to the life of the world, but is loving availability and responsiveness to the givingness of God, which changes everything. Of course, for most of us, our daily meditation practice feels nothing like this. Far from simple, selfless gazing upon God, we spend most of our time wrangling our distractions, struggling to let go, even for a minute, our anxieties, fears, and plans. But this doesn't matter. All that matters is that we faithfully bring ourselves before the light of God as wholly and unselfconsciously as we can. Over time, our vision and our desires are transfigured. In the light of God's vast, generous, and spacious love, we may come to see just how unjust our globalised market economy is. Not only in the sense that it systematically exploits people and the natural world, but also in the sense that it is out of true, out of alignment with the human vocation to participate and share in the creative goodness of God, to live and work so as to enable and celebrate God's outpouring life. And the more we come to know this vast and spacious love and know ourselves given by it, the more we are at least inwardly free with respect to the system. Maggie Ross suggests that one sign we are growing in the way of contemplation is the desire to get rid of stuff and the refusal to acquire more. This isn't just a shift in values, but a transformation of desire itself. Not only is there nothing we want to buy, but most of what's on offer looks shabby and sad, not to mention a waste of natural resources, she writes. And that's why Robin Williams claims that contemplation is the only ultimate answer to the unreal and insane world that our financial systems and our advertising culture and our chaotic and unexamined emotions encourage us to inhabit. But say this is where a serious contemplative practice leads us into a different personal relationship with this system. Even so, how are we supposed to stand against the overwhelming power of the system in our world, other than plotting our individual escapes through a tree change or retirement, if we're lucky enough to have a nest egg? Dorothy Seller writes, "Are visions of resistance not long gone or turned into harmless private eccentricity? Fantasies of becoming a hermit? Can it really be that contemplative practice itself offers resources for resistance, and so for transforming not just ourselves, but the systems in which we work and learn and serve?" In 1978, the Czech writer Václav Havel wrote a powerful analysis of the conditions of power in Eastern Europe at that time. Called "The Power of the Powerless," Havel's essay noted the necessary collusion of all in maintaining what he called the post-totalitarian system by which millions were oppressed. When he called this a post-totalitarian system, Havel didn't mean that the system was no longer totalitarian, but that it was totalitarian in a new way. It was not like an old-style dictatorship which relied on the overt exercise of force by a small group against the populace, but had become a system of power that pervaded every aspect of life by means of an all-embracing ideology. Everyone, from the most powerless worker to the highest functionary, was in some sense its victim, since everyone was enforced to enact their loyalty to it and to live as if that were just how life was. Everyone was forced to live their life on its terms, to acquiesce in its lie. I think Havel's discussion is significant for us because although the post-totalitarian system that he's talking about was a particular, and he says drastic manifestation of an all-pervading system, it points to an ever-present human possibility. Havel wrote, "The fact that human beings have created and daily create this self-directed system through which they divest themselves of their innermost identity is not the result of some incomprehensible misunderstanding of history, nor is it history somehow gone off its rails. Neither is it the product of some diabolical higher will, which has decided, for reasons unknown, to torment a portion of humanity in this way. It can happen, and it did happen, only because there's obviously, in modern humanity, a certain tendency toward the creation, or at least the toleration, of such a system." You see the connections. This tendency in modern humanity, Havel said, is connected to our seduction by the consumer value system and our enslavement to technology. He writes, "These form people whose identity is dissolved in an amalgam of the accoutrements of mass civilization and who have no roots in the order of being." No roots in the order of being. And all this predated the emergence of social media. Havel's contention was if this atomization and this rootlessness is ultimately what enables the power of the system, then the liberation of post-totalitarian Europe could not lie merely in political revolution. Why? Because if all you do is install new leadership, you will not have transformed the deeper alienation of modern humanity. For this reason, he said, real liberation would require a radical renewal of the relationship of human beings to the human order, which no political order can replace. He spoke of the necessity of a new experience of being, a renewed rootedness in the universe, a newly grasped sense of higher responsibility, a newfound inner relationship to other people and to the human community. These factors, he said, clearly indicate the direction in which we must go. And I think they indicate the same for us. Havel is saying that the way this post-totalitarian system tends to function to keep us alienated from each other and from our real humanity and from our connection to the natural world, it's just an extreme version of what's happening in the West as well. The human failure that it mirrors, he says, is only one variant of the general failure of modern humanity. I know that's all fairly dense, but if this same co-option by a system that inherently alienates us from the fullest truth of our common life and ourselves is taking place in the West as well. I think his analysis helps us to kind of identify our situation. And then the question becomes for us as well, what might the renewal of relationship to the human order, to a truly human life, look like in practice? Well, to begin with, Havel speaks of the profound significance of refusing to keep going along with the lie. His example is of a greengrocer who snaps one day and refuses to display in his shop window the Soviet slogan that kind of performs his ongoing loyalty to the system. In the American Civil Rights Movement, we might think of Rosa Parks' decision to sit at the front of the bus rather than at the back where she was supposed to sit as an African American woman. Her decision to sit at the front of the bus is another example of the refusal to keep playing along with the lie that perpetuated, in her case, the system of racial segregation in the American South. Actions like this reject the ritual and break the rules of the game that everyone's kind of formed in. Their attempts, says Havel, to live within the truth. But what might this mean in the context I sketched out at the beginning? Contexts of much less overt oppression, which are nevertheless profoundly oppressive. I think one element might involve refusing just to go along with a narrative that privatizes the diseases under which we labour. I've got a friend who raised with a sympathetic boss the impact of her punishing workload and on her health. And he advised her to draw her boundaries and care better for herself. But the work wasn't going anywhere. And my friend knew that the cost of any self-care and boundary drawing she implemented would fall on her equally overwhelmed colleagues. Mimi Cook writes, if unwellness is structural, then so must be care. Self-care is an individual solution to an individual problem, completely divorced from social context. We need, she says, structures of care that address the actual forces that make life feel unbearable. And she asks, what do these structures need to look like? Well, given the interlocking webs in all this, I don't know the answer to that question. But Cook suggests asking this question in every space you move through changes every space you move through. Havel said that when the greengrocer refused to display the slogan the system deems necessary, he's going to pay for it. Through its alienating presence in people, the system will punish him for his rebellion, he said. Nevertheless, his action has an impact because it makes visible the fact that it is possible to live from the truth in the midst of a culture of lies. And this connection with the truth has its own hidden power. So what might it be if we called out that narrative that it's all about self-care? Havel also saw that part of strengthening this capacity to live in the truth is what he called a renewed rootedness in the universe. It seems to me that one sign of a yearning for renewed rootedness is seen in the renewed practice of meditation, even if, as we've seen, meditation can be co-opted in the service of the system, but it doesn't have to be. But this yearning for renewed rootedness may also be seen in the widespread re-emergence of practices like walking and pilgrimage. A recent Guardian article by John Harris spoke of a new kind of politics beginning to emerge in the UK from those who are newly immersed in the natural world. A new breed of protesters, walkers, campers, foragers, and wild swimmers is working, he said, towards a new culture that returns nature to the centre of society and that refuses to take for granted a money-driven absolutism. There are other contemplative practices too. Biblical scholar Walter Brueggemann has written of keeping the Sabbath as an act of both resistance and alternative. It's resistance because it is a visible insistence that our lives are not defined by the production and consumption of commodity goods. It's alternative because it is the awareness and practice of the claim that we are situated on the receiving end of the gifts of God. Sabbath, in other words, is not just self-care. It's not just having a break. It's an explicit acknowledgement that our life is responsive to something bigger. And there are a range of other movements and communities that function to resist the system of globalised capitalism and enact alternatives. I'm sure you know of them. In Australia, we have things called Buy Nothing groups, Buy Nothing New groups, volunteer land care groups, NGOs of many descriptions. All these, to use Seller's words, embody a different subject than the one that has fallen asleep in the prison of consumerism. Even so, the juggernaut seems relatively undeterred. At the macro level, news filters out of massive quantities of dark money funded by fossil fuel and other interests, manipulating global markets, information and governance so as to maintain their corporate and cultural dominance. At the micro level, it's hard enough for my friend to enact resistance in the context of a relatively secure economic position and a job she actually wants to do. What hope of liberation do the truly powerless have? And can contemplative practice really help? This section is called Ensouling the System. Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is not coming with things that can be observed, nor will they say, look, here it is, or there it is. For in fact, the kingdom of God is among you. I've said that true contemplation connects us powerfully with the real source of our life. Martin Laird speaks of breaking through the veil of our fears, distractions, and self-obsessions into a flowing and luminous vastness that we recognise as the ground of all. This isn't an awareness that displaces the life of the world, but it undergirds it and may suffuse it. As we begin to touch into this ground, new possibilities for being become available in the midst of things. Seller wrote, one of the spiritual difficulties in our situation is the inner connection between globalisation and individualisation. The more globally the market economy structures itself, the less interest it demonstrates in the social and ecological webs in which humans live, the local connectedness. And the more it requires the individual who is without any relation whatsoever, wants to disconnect us. And of course, the more disconnected an individual is, the less they feel responsible for the web and the less power they are capable of exercising. All resistance movements, we talk about mysticism as resistance, all resistance movements know the necessity of moving from fragmentation to community. From the base communities of Latin American liberation movements to communities of artists and activists under totalitarian regimes, to Extinction Rebellion and the Me Too movement in the present day. This is partly about the necessity for solidarity and support if a counter movement is to be sustained. And it's also about making visible in the life of the world an alternative way of life. And yet there's a sense in which creating communities of resistance in some of the contexts I've spoken of seems more complex. The stressed and overworked academics and civil servants, teachers, nurses, and parents that I know are not victims of identifiable oppressors in the same way as our African Americans or Indigenous Australians suffering police violence, or women suffering systemic male violence. The violence we suffer in this system is often far less overt and takes place under comparatively pleasant conditions, amidst colleagues we like and work we value. Our market-driven system as a whole may be implicated in a range of social and ecological ills, but it is possible within it still to do good work and to seek to make things better. And moreover, there are rewards of status and security, identity and meaning for at least those at the educated and professional end of things. We may rail against aspects of the system, but we are also to some extent complicit in it. Thus, the question of what exactly needs to be resisted and by whom becomes nebulous and elusive. And this makes the movement from fragmentation to community seem almost impossible. At the least, it seems as though the forging of community organised specifically around this question will not eventuate. And this is where I sense the significance of contemplative practice in generating the kind of community we need. John Main said that meditation creates community. Not first and foremost a community of shared suffering and commitment, but what I'm going to call community in being. In true prayer, we are slowly dispossessed of the identities forced upon us by others and that we seek to secure for ourselves. In the paradox Jesus taught, we discover that in losing the self we thought we were, the egoic identity to which we're attached and by which we're imprisoned, we find who we are in God, loved, held, called. Through this experience, we begin to realise that at the root of our existence is sheer givenness. We find ourselves increasingly in love with the world and with those with whom we share it. And it's this being in love that enables, in Havel's terms, a newfound inner relationship to other people and to the human community. And from this place, I think several things are different. For one, the demands of the system are relativised. Even if in practical terms, they consume much of our time and focus and determine many of our options, they cannot colonise our being in the same way. And this generates immediately the possibility of living with greater freedom. And for the same reason, our response to our situation may begin to unfold from a deeper and more integrated place, the space of the heart, which is the seat of wisdom and courage. If the system functions to separate us from ourselves and from the web of life, contemplation functions to reconnect us. And this means we are present within the system from a different energy. And this may enable us to discern and imagine responses that seemed previously unavailable. For example, naming the injustice of certain expectations, speaking on behalf of others, or initiating change in our sphere of influence. This fuller access to courage and wisdom opens the possibility too of recalling some of our professions back to their own soul. What if higher education was once more valued primarily for encouraging the gift of learning, rather than, as in Australia, being our fourth largest export industry? Similar vocational questions could be raised in connection with healthcare, public service and the media industries, among others. Of course, the possibility of actively seeking to, what I'm calling, ensoul the system, remind the system of its own soul and vocation, presupposes some level of agency and influence. It presupposes that those with whom we might raise our concerns themselves have some capacity to act, and often they don't. And what of the migrant worker who cannot afford to risk upsetting his boss? The single mother working 2 jobs, or at the mercy of a faceless and inadequate welfare system? And here I think we see the deepest significance of creating communities in being, spaces in the world where people can be reminded of who they really are and share life with others who recognise them in that way, at that level. Spaces where life is directed beyond production and consumption and mere entertainment, to the recognition and the celebration of the deeper realities in which we live and move and have our being. This, I think, is a serious call to the Church to remember its essential vocation to be an alternate polis, an alternate city, a sacrament in this world of the kingdom of God. Havel wrote that individuals can be alienated from themselves only because there is something in them to alienate. I say the essential needs of the soul do not go away. So, to quote Havel again, under the orderly surface of the life of lies, there slumbers the hidden sphere of life in its real aims, of its hidden openness to truth. Communities in which we are freed to be, reconnect us to the hidden sphere of life in its real aims. They awaken and strengthen this in us. And this makes a difference. Just as in meditation, for a long time it can seem as though nothing is happening. So, says Havel, the hidden process of strengthening our connection to the source of truth can issue forth when, where, under what circumstances, and to what extent is difficult to predict in something visible, a political movement, a political act or event or social movement, a sudden explosion of civil unrest, a sharp conflict inside an apparently monolithic power structure, or simply an irrepressible transformation in the social and intellectual climate. Contemplative communities, I want to say, are called to be part of nourishing and strengthening the conditions for just this breaking through of a truer humanity and a healthy world. A breaking through that is already visible in certain spheres and places, the need for which is more and more urgently felt in others. We are called not simply to survive or adapt ourselves to an unjust and corrupting system, but to transform it. So let our fidelity to the gift of true contemplation help us play our part in the renewal of the whole.
Don't disappear. Okay. Thank you so much. My goodness.
I know, sorry, halfway through I thought, oh bloody hell, these poor people.
It's amazing what you've been saying, and I just sense that hope, against these systems that we don't just say, oh well, that's how the world is. There is real hope. We can get out there and do something. So thank you for that. I'm sure you've got 101 questions or comments that you'd like to share with Sarah. There's quite a lot of you, so as we go into questions, could I ask you, if you're asking a question, to stand and project your voice so that everyone can hear your question? That would be really helpful. But is that okay, Sarah, to ask questions? So I'll let you get back up here.
And if you got lost halfway through and want to say, how did that bit connect with that, please feel free to say that as well.
Would anyone like to start off with a question? Yes, someone right at the back, thank you.
One thing that I picked up is that we never said about the love of God. Contemplation is about loving God and wanting to sit before Him and just being. For me personally, it's never been about what I can achieve on that. So while I am totally in agreement that if we all go and truly love God and contemplate Him, then He will do the work within us, as in the book, The Cloud of Unknowing, and that has certainly been the case for me. I think there needs to be a differentiation between meditation and contemplation, because the two are completely different. So meditation and mindfulness without believing God. But contemplation is purely the love of God. So again, from my own experience, I am a Benedictine albeit a Catholic one. I come away from the monastery and come back to a nightmare. And I'm the same as I have distributed come in, and there's no respect. I'm trying to explain that I have to set prayer times, I have to watch mass at a certain time, and they insist on walking in, and we don't even know. So yes, it's very, very difficult to come back into society. And even trying to explain your change of circumstances or the fact that I'm Catholic, I'm practicing Catholic, is not respected in any way, shape or form. And that is within the NHS as a whole. And for anyone, for example, ringing GPs, wanting to come by, and you ask what time that will be, you just told, well, that'll be any time. But that then, I used to come out of church and voicemails, we've tried to get in touch with you. Basically, the trial was in mass. And again, I've had some horrible messages there. So how do we counteract? Because unfortunately now, we're in such a situation where anyone who's religious is in the minority.
Thanks. Yeah, and you make a very good point, and I guess that's what I was trying to get at with this sense of community of being, where we kind of learn to know ourselves and to know others as at that deeper level, where we are held and loved by God, and that's the place out of which we relate to ourselves and to others. Exactly. Yes.
Hi, I'm Rona. I work over the road at Leeds Church Institute. I'm just wondering, you teach at a Catholic university. How, and as an African, how important do you think it is for an organisation like ours? We have a series of talks about disability theology. How important do you think ecumenism is in listening to all the different faith traditions? As a practicing Catholic myself, quite often the Catholic Church is left out of ecumenism, quite often the Pentecostal Church, and quite often evangelical churches don't fit within ecumenism. So how do you see ecumenical dialogue and discourse? Do you think that's important to having a more proactive approach to well-being and contemplation?
The problem with the internet is you can't update yourself. So I am no longer a research fellow at the Catholic University. So, yeah, I mean, I guess. So Benedictus, the contemplative community that I lead, is an ecumenical community. So we have people from all those different kind of faith traditions practicing meditation together. And I guess just to clarify, the word meditation, the word contemplation, have different meanings. I guess when I'm using the word meditation, it's in the sense that the World Community for Christian Meditation uses the word, which is almost synonymous with contemplation, with the slight caveat that meditation is the method, is the practice. It's sort of what we do. Contemplation is the gift. It's what's given that you can't force as a fruit of the practice. But I think, if the focus of this talk has been about the kind of larger kind of economic, cultural, social systems in which we're all functioning and by which many feel oppressed, and either as then the idea of mysticism as resistance, or a kind of contemplative alternative becoming visible in the world, which both strengthens individuals but also makes visible a different kind of corporate sociality, then that witness isn't terribly strong if all the different people who supposedly practice it are at each other's throats. so there's a kind of a real need to allow ourselves to grow in love and fellowship and understanding, you know, as a part of that. Again, not over against the world, but in order to make visible some different possibilities. So I think it is important. I guess a question is, how does that happen? And one of the things that seems to me that a contemplative approach to ecumenism, including interreligious ecumenism, makes possible is that in the sharing of the silence, we begin to meet each other at a deeper level. Whereas if we stay at the level of, well, I believe this and you believe that, and how do you define this, we don't tend to get very far. So I would say that contemplation is a really important, well, it's the foundation of real ecumenism, I guess. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. You will know that, well, we all know, there's a rising tide of resistance to the system or opposition to it from what one might call the right. So we've just heard in France, the president, is it? Wants an election to try and counter that. And so I think that depends on not a valuing of the other, but a denigration of the other, and it's rising. So how can that be countered? And I suppose it's by the way of meditation and contemplation. But I just wonder whether we need to acknowledge that force. People feel disaffected, unfranchised. In America, Europe, increasingly the right. But it's based on fear of the other. And fear of the migrants and all that. So with that as background, how do you any sort of thoughts about how to counter them, other than by countering it?
Yeah. And I think that's, I think I spoke about a kind of a dis-ease and in the various pressures that people are under, the sort of sense of having been rendered rootless in various ways, and that there are, when dis-ease is present, people will react out of that in different ways, seeking to bring about a different kind of outcome. So there are more or less productive ways, I guess, to resist, or ways that are more likely to lead us into a more reconciled and integrated place, or ways that are actually going to continue to fragment. And so perhaps some of these, as you say, on the right, it can happen in a whole range of ways. Forms of resistance or reaction to the suffering that this kind of exploitative system has given rise to, and so I guess what I'm sort of offering is a way of resistance which is designed to, well, designed isn't the right word, but is seeking to resist in a way which actually issues in fuller wholeness and integration and reconciliation, and the possibility of seeing everybody as connected and all of that, rather than just by excising whatever bit is scapegoated for it, which inevitably is not the real source, because the real source of it has an interest in distracting us with scapegoating irrelevant things. Yeah. So I guess that would be the framing of it.
Henriette first, and then I'll just
Is there a sense that maybe this resistance will always remain prophetic, rather than that it will have a real impact on the systems that are so powerful? And what can we learn from Jesus and his disciples in the early church in terms of the way they formed communities, and also resistance in their ways of being and praying and sharing? But we're still in some ways on the margins and prophetic.
Yes, yeah. I think that's probably true. That's probably right. But I guess I'm thinking of Václav Havel and what looked impossible, a system that just looked completely totalising and impossible, did shift. Now, of course, soon enough, the forces snapped back in maybe slightly different form, but, snapped back. And so maybe that is the same, but I must say I'm drawn to his phrase of his where he talks about simply an irrepressible transformation in the social and intellectual climate. That something that was unthinkable starts to become thinkable and habitable. And you look back and you think, I can't believe we were back there. And I guess just as a matter of survival, we need something like that irrepressible transformation in the way we relate to the natural world. And unless that happens, if we pretend that can just keep going on while a few of us at the margins, that's, so I guess, but of course you can't be naive about, the kingdom of God suddenly appearing in our midst. So yeah, I think it's an important question, and of course in advance you don't know what the possibilities are. Yeah.
Yes, I think I answered the question not to actually as an encouragement.
Yes.
However small it feels and however powerful systems are, there is real encouragement in it being prophetic and doing it with God and trusting that there is a bigger reality eventually.
Yes, and that it's actually connecting into the real energy of reality, I guess, and that's, I think, what I like about his analysis about, the system in its corrupt form is a lie, and underneath the truth doesn't go away, and that's always more powerful, even if the lie will reassert itself in a different form. So I think that's right. And really that's, I think, the power of his essay, which is called The Power of the Powerless. And the only power that the powerless might have is to stop going along with the lie. Like that might be the first exercise of it. And not just, inwardly, but also hopefully in corporate life or common life or publicly. Yeah. Thanks.
Julia?
Well, thank you very, very much. I mean, my sort of observation on it is I've sort of slightly forgotten, but it really follows on into what you were saying about prophetic communities, because that none of that was really news to me, but the way you spoke it, articulated it so beautifully, and really touched my heart. It was really lovely. Thank you. But I've been active. I mean, I'm a retired health worker. I've been very active in the climate movement for the last 3 years. The bit that came after Extinction Rebellion. And it has been with a sense that it's a prophetic work, and I'm also a committed Christian, and sometimes that's awkward, but mostly it's been really lovely. And I'd just like, as a bit of encouragement really, just to describe one moment when I was slow marching on the roads last autumn. And you don't half get some abuse thrown at you, you know. London van drivers are the worst. You sort of get used to it. And it's very high emotion stuff, you know. We've trained, and we love each other and we link arms, and, you know, we're completely non-violent, completely peaceful, and it is a work, you know. But at that moment when we were being so abused, I honestly felt, I sort of went into a bit of a different place and felt as though I was Christ walking to Calvary. And, you know, that's probably sounds a bit irreverent, but it was the truth. You know, I felt that was what we were doing in our witness. So there can be these extraordinary moments, you know, and they keep me going, because I'm sort of a bit like that and slightly crazy. But it is wonderful hearing somebody like Sarah who brings it all together. It's just great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
Shall we have this lady and then Keith?
I think that my question or my comment follows on exactly from where you've just spoken, because you spoke of a healthy world. I'd like to hear a little bit about what you feel is a healthy world, because I wonder if we've got enough people in the world who want a healthy world in order to bring that about. I mean, you've spoken a great deal about meditation, of groups coming together, and I think, you know, the Extinction Rebellion, etc., is a group like that. But my concern is there are so many people who want to live their very individual lives in their own particular way, regardless of anybody else. That I wonder if we've got enough people in our world, in general, to bring about a healthy world.
I don't know.
Okay.
But I guess one sense I have is that it's this kind of transformation is non-linear. So it's not just stacking up the number of, you know, this number of people outweigh this number of people, because it is about, I think, shifting the underlying, social and intellectual climate. Because there's a whole bunch of people I think, who are formed by the culture that they're formed in and don't particularly go outside that or criticise it or, you know, seek to be prophetic of that. But if the culture of formation is different, life will be different. So it's not a matter of every individual person needing to be converted or 51% of people needing to be. It's about shifting some of the baseline assumptions in which people are just begin to take for granted in the direction, in a healthier direction. So I think about, you know, formation in say, Indigenous communities in Australia. There's certain, you just taught certain things, and it's not like everyone has to individually be converted to love of country. That's just the culture. And so and similarly, our culture has just been, well, you can, I mean, I know I don't want to, there's a real risk in this conversation of just completely overgeneralising and all of that, but if I can overgeneralise, you know, we are formed in a more individualistic, more extractive, more, my job is to get on in life, I need to support my family by myself. You know, that's a lot of the formation. So of course that's how people behave, and it's hard not to behave like that because people have to earn their living and they have to, you know. So, yeah, so I guess my response would be there's a non-linearity here, and that's the level at which this tapping into, you know, if it's true, if this analysis is kind of true, that the significant aspects of the culture and the economic paradigm that we're living inside of is a lie. It's not in the sense that it's out of true with the fundamental rhythm of life. Then tapping back into the true has a power which is more powerful than simply numerical in terms of numbers. So that would be kind of, so that's, I guess, where that talk of tipping points, social tipping points as well as climate tipping points is part of that conversation. Yeah.
Thank you.
We just let Keith.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your words, Sarah. I just wanted to follow on from you, really, after you followed on from me. Just to ask, we talked about the system and the economic paradigm and the lie and so on. I just wonder whether you think we need to do more to understand what that is, where it has come from,
Yeah.
why life was different when most of us were born, you know, how life has changed, how the economics and the politics have developed and changed over our lifetimes, and how that's been a deliberate process designed by certain people.
Yes.
And encouraged by politicians, and is now the sea that we're all swimming in.
Yes. Yeah.
And how a failure to address that and have that as something we talk about in our faith communities, you know, the roots of this,
Yeah,
leaves us all just potentially swimming around feeling powerless.
Yes, yeah. Look, I think that's exactly right. And one of the things that gave me a lot of vertigo in writing this talk is, I don't know all of that in that much depth, but I'm aware that there is a lot of literature about that, understanding that, the economic, political roots of that. And I guess that's why I said at the beginning, I'm going to come at this from the perspective of kind of pastoral engagement with the people that I see who are drowning in various ways, seeking to kind of speak out of that. But I totally agree that actually understanding analysis, being able to identify where are the levers, all of that is a necessary part of this process. Yeah. And then there's one at the back too.
I don't want to be polyamorous, and I agree with everything you've said. I think there's a scope for looking at the ways the younger generation are changing things. That we can be in danger of, you know, at my greater age, and not far greater age, of overlooking. So I was thinking when I'm quite good at things, and at our meeting, very many young people, many of them are part of Just Stop Oil, but also other radical rebellious movements, are coming to find support and sort of spiritual holding. And that seems to me to be a wonderful thing. But then what keeps going around my mind is a much more everyday sort of mundane example is my daughter, who's not a radical person, and she just gets on with life and works for the NHS, but she has small children, and she has more or less provided for those children through things like Facebook Marketplace. She hasn't bought masses of new stuff, and that's just normal and common for her and her mates. And what's more, she'll go to, she'll see somebody advertises a cot, and she'll go around to that house and look at the cot, and the person selling it at a reduced price will say, I've got all these clothes, I'll just have this. And
there's so much of that happening,
Yeah.
that we shouldn't overlook, in little ways, as you say, things shift.
Yes, yeah, thank you. And again, I'm aware of that danger of kind of over negativizing, and that's happening and greatly to be celebrated and acknowledged. And I think that is part of, I said there's a, there's a breaking through of this, that's already visible in certain spheres and places, and I think that's true. So it's not like we're starting at nowhere. Yeah, totally. Thank you.
There's somebody at the back. Yes.
Hi Sarah, you want to stand up there? Hi. If I can try and put something when you're talking, you were talking about that inherent resistance and the difficulty of kind of co-opting that order of being by the system, that, there's kind of needs of the soul kind of exist somewhere else that it can reside somewhere that's maybe harder to pull into that system. And I love how you talked about a kind of community of holding each other at that level. I was just wondering how important you felt physical spaces of being together are, and the lack of availability for kind of community spaces now, and how important it is to kind of try and pull back ownership of those physical spaces to keep together, and whether that has something to do with formation of the church.
Thanks, yes. I think that is really important. As you were speaking, actually, the image that came to my mind was from the movie Belfast, which I saw a couple of years ago. I don't know if you've seen it, but one of the things that really struck me about that was how they would spend their Sunday afternoons, which was together as a neighbourhood, and there'd be dancing in the street, or, it was just the community hanging out together, not in a venue that they paid to get into, not in a, nothing kind of commercialised entertainment, just a community doing that with each other. And it just really struck me, because I thought, that's so rare. In my world, it feels quite rare. So I think that's right. I think places where people can be together, not, neither as buyers nor sellers, or but in community is really significant, and the loss of those public spaces, but also the loss of, in a sense, again, the cultural loss of this is what we do together. This is how we might spend a Sunday afternoon. Maybe it's part of that kind of sense of fragmentation or atomization, and the fact that people kind of struggle on privately with some of these things. Although, again, taking the point that that's not always the case, and that there are younger people gathering in different ways, and finding different kinds of space. But I think that is something to be attentive to, and I guess something that I feel like is the role of the church, to be one of those non-coercive spaces where people are allowed to be. And of course, that's another problem, because that's often not how people experience coming to church, as a non-coercive space where they're allowed to be. So that's a whole another thing. Yeah, I think there is something, like there's an embodiment about this. It's a way of inhabiting the world physically, as well as, just with ideas or whatever. Yeah.
And I think that during COVID, it's been said that during COVID it brought back a bit of that sense of community. And I know my own daughter lives on a row of terraced houses, on the street of terraced houses, and during COVID they all got together in each other's gardens and had coffee and wine. But there was that real sense of community, and my daughter and son-in-law were thinking of moving house, but now they're saying we don't want to, because all our community is on this street. So I think there is a sense of that, people yearning to link up together in community spaces. And then we can
I've got so many questions, but thank you very much. It was fascinating, really enjoyed it all. And I'll try and formulate some questions, but there was two comments in my head. One was about lived experience and being able to communicate that. I mean, personally, having been a meditator, I've done this for a number of years now, I've left my job, so I've left the organisation, which I'm a prison secretary, actually. I left the church I was in, and I'm clearing away the clutter at the moment of a lifetime. So personally, you know, there's things that are changing within me. The question I have on that bit is around how, because we've all got lived experience through being contemplative, meditating, etc. And I did try mindfulness as well, but that didn't do it for me. I found meditation, that's exactly where I got comfortable, and that's what I was looking for. So there's a bit around how do we communicate this? I mean, being that person, but you know, how do we get that out there? Because we talked about young people, and you said about them, you know, connecting, wanting, looking, well, we know that, and they are the future. It's not us. That's always. And the other part of the question, there's two parts. Having worked for a huge organisations throughout my career, and I'm now lucky enough not to have to, and I left, or paid to go, which is fantastic. But and your comment around, you know, sort of the agenda is, well, let's introduce well-being because it's going to save us some money. Look at that and that. So it's not that either. If you want to be in organisations and promote this, but it's what does a contemplative organisation look like? Have you come across any models of what it should be? Because even the WCC, you know, isn't necessarily that always either. So you know, charities are. So where are the models that we can promote, and also we also disseminate from our lived experience? We've all got stories. You know, there's two parts, the individual and the...
Yes, yeah. I'll start with the second one, which is about, you know, what does it look like organisationally if you know, moving in this direction. And I guess, I think what we need to say is it's not like there's this thing that looks like this perfect and then everything else, you know, it's always imperfect and it's always on the way because, you know, because we're all who we are and, you know, we're not there yet either. And so there's that sense in which it's not, I don't have a model of, well, this is what it could look, this is what it should look like. But I guess some of the things I would want to see becoming more, well, for example, that point about people, when people raise issues of burnout or kind of overwhelm, the discourse not immediately go to self-care, like that there be a recognition in organisations that this is a systemic issue, it's not an individual issue. And to make that move, to kind of feel like, oh, I can't make that move anymore, we can't make that move anymore. I feel like there are some things that a shift in that narrative, or the whole narrative of resilience, as if somehow it's my personal responsibility to be able to cope with this. I think if there was if we started to move in that kind of direction, or an organisation recognised that's not where the issue lies, that would be a shift, that would be a positive shift. And then it might invite some reflection on, okay, so what is going on? What are the imperatives that we're responding to, whether they're government directives or commercial imperatives or whatever, that are causing people to live on the cusp of burnout and nervous breakdown? You know, that would be a different conversation in an organisation or a government department. So that would be the kind of direction, I think. I think that there's some kind of perfect model of a contemplative, because, you know, God knows church hasn't done too well at that. So, you know, we're all, but does that, yeah, so,
I mean, I wasn't thinking of a model, it was more elements.
yes,
You know, things that would help.
yeah,
I think the question I would have back to you on that one would be, you know, how that even gets raised in the first place, because I burned out from the prison service twice, and when I left, I had 6 months off work, and there was a package and I took it. I couldn't change from within.
No.
On my own. But interestingly enough, I've been meditating for a year, and that's when I left. I thought, right, I can go now. Getting the courage to go, but I wasn't able to talk about it.
no,
And that's, so it's how we get that dialogue going. So before casualty.
yes,
happens,
that's
you know.
right.
And so who's going to do it? How do we do that?
Yeah.
That's all my question.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I was trying to acknowledge in the sense that, you know, or how do the truly powers, you know, like I said, it's hard enough for my friend who's in a reasonably, you know, economically secure position to raise that. How does someone who's, and you might raise it with your boss and they're struggling under exactly the same thing, so they can't do anything either. So that's true. And in that sense, we're in the same place as the Havel's post-totalitarian Eastern Europe. You know, you raise it with the party boss and, well, that's going to go well. So that's where I feel like there is this, so how does this broader shift where that dialogue starts to happen or those questions start to be able to be raised? Well, some of the stuff I've drawn on, you know, this Asian academics book about how it operates in universities, but there is something about individuals developing a certain courage and sense of themselves that it's actually not my problem. It's not my failure. That's part of it. There's lots of different elements, but I don't think you can just turn it like that. I think what we're talking about is the kind of cultural shift that, in the same way that an ecological awareness has taken decades to arise, this is that same level of cultural shift. And the levers aren't just sitting around, obviously, I'll just pull that lever. And yeah, so I think it is a combination of what you said, the individual learning to source their identity in a different place, and so having a different freedom and a different courage, being in relation with others who are having that conversation and who kind of see the wisdom and the truth in that, then seeing what's possible in a particular place or context or particular, so it's part of a cumulative thing, I think. But yeah, for an individual burning out right now in a system, I'm not saying that if you meditate or even if you bring meditation into the organisation, that's going to shift it, because at the moment it's more likely just to be co-opted rather than
Yeah, meditation can't be to leave, actually.
well, that's the thing, and that can be an important thing. Like if something's really toxic, maybe what you have to do is leave. But then the question, but then that seller's question: is this just a private eccentricity in the sense that individuals make their escape versus how do we shift the whole? Yeah. I think maybe people are needing to.
Yes, I was just looking at my watch. It is nearly 1:45.
Yeah.
So unless there's any other burning questions.
And I'm happy to stay if people want to ask a question privately as well. So.
Well, thank you for the questions.